My name is Toasty Thunder and welcome back to another video. But before we get into the video itself, I just want to thank you for all the support that was shown to my PGR video. It legitimately received 40 times more views than my previously highest viewed video, so thank you so much for the support. And I hope you stay tuned for the next one. Today's video though is about the new Final Fantasy XIV expansion, Dawntrail. I do plan on discussing spoilers, so if you have not finished yet and spoilers are something you are worried about, go finish the game now and come back when you're done. First thing I want to mention about Dawntrail is that while FF14 music never slouches, Dawntrail's music is phenomenal. FF14 music does such a good job of emotionally punctuating everything that happens in the story, from getting your blood pumping to being reflective, and here in Dawntrail, it's no different. I was kind of worried with the opening theme originally because I'm not the biggest fan of it, but every song in the game has been an absolute banger. Final Fantasy XIV is renowned for its story, and I think it owes so much of that to the gravitas its fantastic soundtrack adds to its most important moments. Going into Dawntrail, we had just finished up a huge storyline with Endwalker, so in Dawntrail, where it would go from here and how it would feel was kind of up in the air, and some people were feeling kind of iffy about the summer vacation vibes. Personally, I found the summer vacation half of the story really good, and honestly the whole previous story helps emphasize that your character is just trying to chillin' for the first part of the story. Canonically in FF14, your character summoning the other reflections of yourself through Azem's crystal in the form of other players is like what your character's superpower is. This is what makes you wildly stronger compared to the average character in this world. And through the entirety of the story, except for the final fight, you never canonically have to use this power. While of course, being an MMO, you can play with other players and friends, but you can just go through the dungeons and even trials with just NPCs, and this helps emphasize your character really being able to kick back in this expansion. And even after this, there's so many cool moments where the story implies your character could absolutely wreck the average nonsense that happens earlier on in the story. From Bakul Jaja as holding a prisoner, that moment was awesome. To just sitting back and letting Wuklamot have her 1v1, being all like, yeah, I raised that girl. To every villain just being like, yeah, Wuklamot kind of just sucks, but the guy in the back though, he's terrifying. It's so cool how even just being given the choice of being able to use NPCs or not for certain story content is relevant to the game's story. One thing I did not expect is to love the characters as much as I did. Even Bakul Jaja ends up a really awesome character by the end of the story. Honestly, I think my least favorite ends up being Aaronville. I don't think he's written poorly or anything, but he just becomes such an annoying broodster until the absolute last possible minute. I would have even liked Zerilja in the end if his initial plan wasn't the dumbest thing I've ever heard. All in all though, while not the absolute killer story that Shadowbringers or Endwalker had, it was still a great time. Definitely is a ton of plot threads to pull on for future expansions, and that's kind of what they were going for in the story, so we'll have to see where they take it from here. A noticeable difference this expansion, in my opinion though, were the dungeon fights. The dungeon fights were kicked up a good notch in difficulty compared to previous expansions. Dungeon fights have gone from, hey, welcome to the game, have fun leveling, of previous expansions. Even in Endwalker, the dungeons were kind of a cakewalk, to this expansion being like, okay, you've played this game for a while, and we expect you to understand specifically FF14, especially the way the AoEs and the room-wide attacks function, where you can't be afraid of standing in the orange as long as you know that some other orange spots are going to be clearing up for you to move to. A particular favorite of mine of the dungeon fights in this expansion was the last fight of the level 100 Carnival dungeon. That fight was really unique and interesting. Also, the two trials were amazing. I have not done the extremes yet though, still looking to do those. Now for Dawntrail, I ended up playing Monk as my first class to level 100. A little later, we'll talk about why I decided Monk over Summoner, but Monk is really fun right now in my opinion. They added a whole new system to Monk, but somehow they managed to make it rotationally feel almost exactly the same. It just looks and functions differently. I'll try to explain. Old Monk didn't have this meter, this fury gauge. Each form has a move that spends these points to receive a damage buff, and a move that builds these points to be spent. In Old Monk, this bar didn't exist. Old Monk, you just got this extra damage buff granted by a move in Raptor form, the green form, and the duration of this buff lasted long enough for you to press your direct damage move twice in a row in this form before you needed to refresh the buff. In Corial form, you had to apply a damage over time from behind your target with the damage buff up to get the full value out of your dot, and the dot lasted long enough for you to get 3 of your Corial form's direct damage ability before you needed to reapply the dot. So essentially, this gauge makes you play the same way you would as Old Monk, but it removes the necessity of needing to keep track of buffs being up with timers, but instead you just always have these buffs up. It does remove the dot altogether, so there's no getting out of that. It removes the need to keep a dot on the target. And personally, I kind of like the changes. With the buff timers, it was always trying to figure out if you had enough time to fit in another before you needed to refresh, or just based on the fight, if you had time to fit in another move before it was going to get away, or if you need to refresh now, then you need to try and calculate if you need to do all these lining up the buffs with your bigger cooldowns. It was just a lot to keep track of mentally, and now it takes a lot of that stress off the mental stack with just, do I have points for the move or not? And especially with the game's fight design getting more and more demanding of the player base. And as someone who has just not done the hardest content in this game yet, I was almost considering not doing Monk of this expansion just because of all the kind of focus it required to play Monk at the highest level. And I was really close to sticking to a Summoner or playing Machinist, but these changes make Monk a little more simple to perform at closer to an optimal level for harder content. And I personally think there's still enough going on to keep it fun. FF14 Monk actually feels like a slightly more involved WoW Monk, where WoW Monk, if you're playing Whirling Dragon Punch, has Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick as your first tiered moves, then Rising Sun Kick and Fists of Fury as your second tiered moves, and then when you're done with those you go into Whirling Dragon Punch, while also asking you to never press the same ability twice in a row. FF14 Monk, instead of having that tiered system where abilities get more powerful, in theory I don't play WoW Monk enough to know how the moves are balanced currently. As you complete the steps required, FF14 Monk has 3 different forms of relatively equal power that you kind of step through to use the other moves. And you use these moves in a certain order to gain access to your most powerful moves. And using your moves in the correct order to get Elixir Field, Rising Phoenix, and Phantom Rush respectively feels awesome. Particularly Rising Phoenix, because the sound effect on that ability is absolutely peak. And even the Corial Pounce move has the sick sound effect of a tiger roar. I kind of feel like they should go more in on the animal sounds. Like, give me a sick angry monkey sound for the leaping Oppo move and some sort of dinosaur roar for the raptor form move. The sound effects of the kit right now make me feel like I'm playing Udyr from League. And the whole flow of the kit feels really rewarding while not overloaded right now, and all the abilities feel really powerful, so I'm having a lot of fun with it. While I really like FF14 Monk right now, and I think I'll happily main it this expansion, it still follows the tried and true FF14. It feels like something is missing that we'll get here in future expansions. In this case, Monk AoE doesn't interact with the Fury bar at all. As of the time of this writing, they've said they're going to buff Monk AoE in some way because the AoE doesn't interact with the new system. And my current guess is they're not going to add any interaction with it. My guess is that it's going to be a classic FF14, while they'll most likely drip feed us buttons that do interact with the Fury system over the course of the next few expansions. It just feels like free real estate at the moment, and I don't see them not doing that. Then again, if you remember my first FF14 video, I talked about Summoner in this context, and now Dawntrail released. They didn't add anything to fill out the parts of the kit that I felt, and from what I'm seeing, a lot of the community too felt, that Summoner needed to feel like a complete class. So maybe Monk is just going to live in this endless limbo of no interactable AoE abilities. Who knows? That being said, other places I see Monk growing now in the future are Corial and Raptor forms are begging for mini cooldowns that eat all their points in one go, because currently their only spenders eat 1 point at a time rather than spending all 2 or all 3 respectively. You could even have a cooldown that has different spenders build points of the next form in the line so that you have another segment of the rotation where you can avoid the builders. And maybe that's kind of weird and kind of awkward to write in a tooltip, but there's some room to grow and get weird with the new Monk system, and I think that's a good spot to be in. Well, those are kind of my thoughts on the expansion for now. It's still pretty early yet, first year of the raid isn't even out, but it's still pretty fun. With everyone leveling Viper and Pigtail Master, I actually plan on leveling Gunbreaker next. Gunbreaker seems very uniquely FF14, so I'll report back when I finish leveling it, or I get to try out the first set of raid fights. And considering I'm at like 66 right now, you might hear about the raids first from me. In the meantime, remember to stay toasty, and I'll see you in the next one.